Dear folks, this is part of the channel Is Islam the Truth? Now we are trying to explore on this particular debate, which is which son did Abraham take up to the mount to be offered as a sacrifice? Is it Isaac or Ishmael? I am going to dive into how these two men were born, what was the words that God spoke about them, and what was the incident that happened between them. Finally, the incident about the sacrifice. So if you read about Ishmael in the Bible, now I'm going to present from the Bible first and later on from the Quran. From the Bible, this is what we read in Genesis 16, that Abraham and Sarai, they could not have a child of their own since they were old, well into their old age. That's when they go for a plan B, which is to take up one of their maidservants, which is Hagar. Through her, they'll have a child. Now, this is actually a plan B, basically showing God, we don't trust you anymore, and then we made our own plans. So basically, Sarah is skipping to wait by faith and then chooses to have a plan B. Now, this being the way they did it, of course, they would not have prayed about this one. Might be they prayed, but they didn't wait. What we can see is Hagar, once she begets or once she conceives, she is looking at her mistress Sarai with a very disrespectful look, because Sarai is still barren. So Hagar is being ill-treated by Sarai because of this particular struggle that's going on between them. And Hagar flees to the desert. There in the desert, an angel meets Hagar and tells Hagar to name the child in the womb as Ishmael. So Hagar comes back and stays with her mistress. That's the point that we can find. And this is something as a promise that comes from God, in the sense they did not desire to have a child, but then God gives a promise out of nowhere. And he calls Sarai the mother of nations. So the other interesting thing about Isaac's birth is God intended a covenant and only with Isaac, because this son is somebody according to a plan by God, whereas Ishmael was a plan by man. In Genesis 18, Isaac is born by a promise from God. So this is an interesting incident from the Bible, where we can see that in this verse 21:1, Jehovah visited Sarah as he had said, and she begat, and the child grew and was weaned. Now if you read verse 9, it says, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. She couldn't tolerate it. That's when she goes unto Abraham and requests him, why don't you cast out the handmaid and her son away? And this grieved Abraham on account of his son Ishmael. Now the interesting thing is, even God told Abraham to do the same, to send the handmaid and her son away. God is not just sending him away, but also gives a promise that through Ishmael, God will bring out 12 princes, and there will be nations even through Ishmael. Hagar and Ishmael, they are on their own, they are no more with Abraham. Now why is this so important? Because we can see all these chapters written in a chronological order. Even the Bible, you can read it in a chronological order, especially the Old Testament. Now when you go to Genesis 21:14, we can see Abraham sends her away, and here is where we can find Hagar and Ishmael are no more with Abraham. Now let's read Genesis 22 verse 2. This is the incident about the sacrifice in the Bible. And he said, take now thy son, thine only son, whom thou lovest, or whom thou love, even Isaac. Now the facts about this verse is, God is saying thine only son in the context of Ishmael already gone with Hagar. So the only son that's there with Abraham is Isaac. So that is why God says thine only son. The next point is God goes on to name the son as Isaac, or specify exactly which son he is talking about by giving out the name that it is Isaac. Now, is the Bible clear about the son to be offered as a sacrifice? Yes, it is clear. But what do the Muslims say about this verse? They go on to claim that this verse is incorrect. They try to justify saying, thine only son can only apply to Ishmael because he was the firstborn and Isaac was not born yet, and that's when you can say thine only son. But that is not the case. That doesn't hold water, simply because in the context of this verse we can read in the prior chapter, which is chapter 21, we can see already Hagar and Ishmael are away. That is why God says thine only son. In order to make things more clear, God goes on to even specify the name by saying Isaac. So there is no confusion about which son was offered as a sacrifice. So now let's read the Quran. What does it say about this episode of sacrifice? We can read from chapter 37 verse 100 on. 100 starts with a prayer by Ibrahim. He basically prays, bless me with a righteous offspring. Now, as we had been meditating from the Bible, we can read that there is no need for Abraham to make a prayer for Ishmael, because it is a plan B. It's a plan made by them. So the only son that he should be praying for should be through Sarai, because that's the thing that was not happening. Now, this is the prayer that was done by Abraham to Allah, and we can read in verse 112, Allah is answering Abraham by saying, we later gave him good news of Isaac, a prophet and one of the righteous. The significance of the word later is basically about something that's transpired between the prayer of Abraham and Allah's answer in 112. So we'll be going into that portion, but one thing is pretty clear, which is Abraham is asking for a son from the righteous, and Allah is saying, here is a son. If you read verses 2 to 4, 2 and 3, we can understand Abraham tells about Allah's will to his son, and his son readily agrees. That's the excellent part about this son, because he was a partaker of the sacrifice. Now, verse 104 to 106, we can basically read that Allah is pleased with Abraham's sacrifice. So, after 106, which is Abraham has already passed the test, we see another interesting turn, which is Allah gives a ransom for the son. Allah gives a ransom for Abraham's son with a great sacrifice. Now, why is this quite different? Because Muslims often say that one cannot be replaced with another's life. What we read here is Allah setting a model, which is Allah is trying to provide a ransom for Abraham's son. Now, what does ransom mean? Ransom means huge payment given to rescue a person, or somebody given on behalf of another. In this case, we can see Abraham's son faced certain death by being sacrificed, but Allah says, instead of that, I will give another. That is the meaning of ransom. And God is setting a model that man cannot bear another's burden, but God can bear another's burden. This is the significance of chapter 37, 107. And this is the essence of the gospel, which is Jesus bearing the burden of another because he is God. And verse 112 is more a conclusion. He says, and we later gave him good news of Isaac. In the sense, whatever has happened now shows it's an evidence that Abraham's son Isaac is also among the righteous, because he was willingly giving himself for the sacrifice. Now Allah gives with proof that Isaac is indeed one among the righteous. Now I was looking later on for Ishmael's name in this entire chapter. We are not able to find any reference, and I find Quran is quite clear that the son offered was indeed Isaac. Thank you for watching.